Today I'm looking at a book that seeks to apply sumo wrestling to the world of mixed martial arts. Hi guys, my name is Joe and welcome to Fighting Words, the martial arts library. On this channel I review martial arts books and talk about martial arts related subjects. Today I'm reviewing the book Sumo for Mixed Martial Arts by Andrew Zerling, published in 2016. Now, when I tried to dig up more about the author and his background, just about everything I've found said the same thing, is that he was a black belt martial artist, no martial art given, with over 2 decades in the martial arts. So I wish I could be more specific. With that being said, one thing that sort of stands out is that he does not have a professional mixed martial arts record, and it doesn't appear that he has competed in sumo either, given that he doesn't appear to be a particularly large individual. So this is sort of an interesting topic for someone who doesn't really seem to be involved in those worlds to delve into. I would like to note that one of his earliest articles was written in conjunction with Renzo Gracie of the Gracie family, who had an extensive mixed martial arts career. And throughout this book, he will actually quote the book Mastering Jiu-Jitsu, one of the first books I reviewed, which is authored by Mr. Gracie as well as John Danaher. Now, the first chapter of this book goes over just an overview of sumo, and in this, there's a lot of history that's talked about. There's also aspects of the training and culture of sumo, as well as some discussion of the winning techniques of sumo. Chapter 2 is on case studies. Now, most of this chapter focuses on the winning strategies and tactics of specific sumo wrestlers, most of them given extensive paragraphs in order to describe the secrets to their success, if you will. There's also a section on open hand techniques, the pushing and thrusting and technically slaps and palm strikes that are permitted in sumo, as well as a section on the winning techniques of sumo. While I thought it was interesting to include the section on open hand techniques, if we are trying to relate this to mixed martial arts, the author does make a point that in the early bare knuckle days, many MMA fighters injured their hands. That's true. These aren't the early MMA days, and I don't know of any current organization where you are not required to wear gloves and hand wraps. So while the section on open hand strikes is interesting, I'm also not sure how it applies to the mixed martial arts environment. Now, to be fair, it isn't until chapter 3 where the author really goes into sumo as it applies to mixed martial arts. The author makes note of the significant differences between mixed martial arts and sumo. For instance, there's no groundwork in sumo, because once someone is pushed out of the ring or touches the ground with anything other than their feet, they've lost. He also notes that mixed martial arts matches last much longer than sumo matches. However, he does focus on the use of the clinch for throws and takedowns from sumo and how it can be applied to mixed martial arts. He also takes a look at the various strategies that different types of mixed martial arts fighters would use, like the sprawl and brawl type of fighter who tries to keep the fight standing, and makes note of how training in sumo could lead to success in these areas. In this section, he also profiles Lyoto Machida. He was a very successful mixed martial arts fighter. He was primarily known for his karate background, but he did train in amateur sumo when he was growing up. And Mr. Zerling tries to create a direct link between his success at sumo and his success in being able to stay on his feet. And chapter 4 is on the actual techniques, and this actually makes up the bulk of the book. First things we get into are stance and breakfalls. Breakfall being how to successfully land if one is thrown. When it comes to stance, he presents both a squared up sumo stance as well as a mixed martial arts stance, and there's a reason I'm using quotes for that. There is no single mixed martial arts stance. I don't know where he got his idea for this one from. I have many books on the subject. It doesn't really catch my eye as a particular stance from one of my sources. I would say, in particular, the position of his rear hand being more forward than we typically see. But with that being said, once again, there is no single mixed martial arts stance. Fighters come from a variety of backgrounds, and all of them tend to look a little bit different. Then we get an intro into clinch grappling. This includes the various clinch positions, the different grips that one could take, fundamental pummeling, in other words, swimming an arm in, and also breaking out of the clinch. He gives two options for that. Now, the type of clinch that Mr. Zerling is going to focus on is what's called the over and under clinch. This is sometimes called the 50-50 clinch because both combatants have roughly the same positions available to attack their opponent. Essentially, you have one of your arms wrapped over top of one of your opponent's arms. You have your other arm going underneath his armpit, grasping the back of his shoulder. He, of course, is wrapping up that arm. Now, the bulk of this section is showing the various kinds of winning techniques that one would find in sumo. This includes everything from push downs, just by repeated pushing and palm strikes to the chest, to throws similar to what we would find in things like judo and wrestling, shoulder throws and hip throws. There are also trips and leg picks. These leg picks, for instance, could be reminiscent of the ankle picks and knee picks that we find in amateur wrestling. He also includes twist down moves, which means from the clinch you are twisting your body in order to maneuver your opponent to the ground. And finally, there's a section for special moves, which don't really fall into any of these categories. These include things that are similar to the snap down in amateur wrestling, where you force the opponent face down to the ground. They also include some rear body lock techniques as well. And in most of these, we get a follow-up pin, or in at least one case, a submission. Now, this is to try to keep the content consistent with trying to link the idea of these sumo throwing techniques with the mixed martial arts environment. If one has a background in something like judo, sambo, or amateur wrestling, one will recognize a lot of these throwing and tripping techniques. There are some that are a little bit unique. For instance, there's one where you essentially apply a standing elbow lock in order to get the opponent on their feet before you execute a throw. I actually think this is the strongest part of the book. I like how it could be related to submission-based wrestling. This would, of course, include the environment of mixed martial arts. One of the reasons for that is that some of these throws are designed to put someone face down instead of on their back, whereas we see in things like judo, sambo, amateur wrestling, a lot of times we're trying to put the opponent onto the back in order to pin them as a means of victory, whereas in mixed martial arts or submission grappling, putting someone on their hands and knees allows one to climb onto their back and attempt choking techniques. It allows one to take a side saddle position and begin to throw strikes at the head. So it might be better for these environments. As far as the pros go, even though the pictures are in black and white, they are pretty high quality, very clear. I did like that. I think the beginning sections are a good introduction to sumo. As someone who doesn't really have any interest in sumo, I thought it was pretty educational. As far as the technical section goes, I think it had a good variety of clinch throwing techniques. And again, not just the formal throws, but also various foot sweeps and snap downs and things along those lines. And the author is just very good at writing. Again, I don't really have a whole lot of interest in sumo, but the author's writing style kept me interested enough. There, at no point was I bored and, rolling my eyes and like, when can I get to the good stuff? As far as the cons go, I've mentioned that all of these throws are shown with follow-up techniques, usually pinning techniques. With that being said, even though they are incorporated into this, there is no information on them. Usually at the end of a sequence, we will see the author in a pinning position, and the caption always reads the same thing. If there is too much separation between Andrew and his opponent after grounding him, Andrew is probably going to lose the advantage. Now, that is a true statement, but I think it would have been very helpful for this book if there had been some information about that, and if it had sort of been brought up at the beginning of the book so it didn't get so repetitive. I mean, this is at the end of just about every throw that winds up on the ground. So at the beginning of the book, we would have a clear idea of, okay, this pin needs to be maintained in order to control the opponent. I think you could have dedicated 1 to 2 pages on that, and it would have made the book a lot better. I'm also critical of some of these entries from a distance. I mentioned that there's a section on thrust down techniques, or basically running toward the guy and pushing him more or less. And that works great in Sumo, where you have a relatively small arena and very large competitors, and one of the goals is to push the guy out of the circle. I think that's less effective in a mixed martial arts environment, because you can just punch the guy in the face as he's trying to push you down. So I understand that he included them because they are part of the winning techniques of sumo, and the purpose of the book was to show those as they apply to mixed martial arts. I just don't think those particular techniques do apply to mixed martial arts. Also, of the techniques from a distance, we get some where his training partner punches at him from a range that's too far away, as shown by this photo. And then in the next sequence, he has grabbed a jab out of the air. Somehow he has gone over, grabbed the top of the guy's wrist. That's not going to happen. And I think this might be one of the disadvantages of not having an MMA background if you're writing a book on mixed martial arts. I think he would have known that the guy wouldn't have snapped out a jab from a foot away, and that you probably wouldn't be able to reach over the top and grab the guy's wrist and pull it down in the time frame that that occurred. So this contrasts with my rather high opinion of the techniques that are already shown in the clinch. I also think sometimes the author tries a little too hard to connect sumo to traditional jiu-jitsu as well as mixed martial arts. Again, he has the inclusion of Lyoto Machida, and I follow Machida's career. I think a lot of his ability to avoid takedowns probably has to do with the fact that he was excellent at maintaining range, which largely came from his karate background. The author also tries to link sumo to the birth of traditional jiu-jitsu by virtue of the fact that sumo is older and a lot of the techniques look alike. And that alone isn't really selling me on it. We do know that early Japan had a lot of exchanges with the Koreas, the Chinese kingdoms, with Okinawa, many other places. Japan has their own version of how the first jiu-jitsu school was set up, and they typically link it back to Chinese martial arts. And the idea that this grappling system has shoulder throws and foot sweeps, and so does this one, so this one must be the parent of this one. I don't think it's a very strong argument. I think he could have made it stronger. That's just me. As far as recommendations go, I think that this is a good book for particularly us older folks who are in the grappling arts, who don't have that background in amateur wrestling, with the level change and the shots. If you can get into the clinch, this is a good reference for many different attacks that you can do from the clinch in order to put your opponent on the ground, again, whether on their back or whether they're face down. I also think it works as a pretty good introduction to sumo. And again, I say this as someone who doesn't have a whole lot of interest in sumo. This so far is more or less my source, and it was interesting and it got my attention, and you're talking about history and tactics and okay, that's cool. So that's all I have for today. If you guys would like to help sponsor the channel or request a video through my Ko-fi account, I'm going to put a link to that in the description. Again, if you like the video, please feel free to give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Finally, thanks for following along with me. Thank you very much, and I'll see you around.